Up on the stage with me, I've got two gentlemen. The first is James Carman. James is the Senior Policy Advisor Taxation for IFIC. He's responsible for all domestic and international taxation policy at IFIC. Beside James is Richard Binnendijk. Richard is our EVP at Univeris, and for those of you that aren't familiar with him, he's been with Univeris since 1994, and he's responsible for all aspects of the EWMS Wealth Platform, product direction, and strategy. So guys, welcome up, and James, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to use the podium, actually. Before I came to IFIC, I worked at the Bank of Montreal, and I was responsible for tax reporting for all their brokerage clients and all institutional clients. And one of the wonderful things about being involved in tax operations is that you have to understand all the products and how the income gets distributed and taxed to investors. And also you have to have an understanding of how systems work and how everything flows through to tax reporting. So when FATCA came up, it was sort of a natural for me. I want to first ask you guys a question. How many of you in this room think that FATCA will have some impact on your business? Please raise your hands. Just impact, though it will probably be negative. So a year ago today, I doubt we would have seen nearly that many hands shoot up. But you're all correct. It's going to impact the entire industry, from dealers to advisors to fund companies and fund managers and brokerage firms. FATCA is pervasive, and it's meant to be. So what I'm going to do today is give you a little bit of a history of how FATCA came into being so that you truly understand what the policy objectives are behind it. I'm going to go into the three main areas that all financial institutions are going to need to prepare for FATCA. I'm also going to speak a bit about intergovernmental agreements, which you may have heard about through the media, and why that's going to be important to your organizations and your clients, and some talk about where do we go from here. So the new millennium brought increased efforts by the IRS to ensure that U.S. taxpayers who were investing abroad were paying their taxes. The first major step in that process, and I guess I should work on the slides as well. There we go. The first major step was the Qualified Intermediary Program, also known as QI, that took effect in 2001. This mainly impacted financial institutions such as brokerage firms whose clients were invested in U.S. securities. Under QI, the foreign financial institution, which I'll refer to from now on as FFIs, were required to obtain proof of residency from all their clients, especially to find out, of course, if they were U.S. If a client failed to produce the necessary documentation, they'd have to pay 30% withholding tax against any payments that they received on U.S. source income, which is quite an extensive penalty. It's important to note, though, that only the withholding tax of undocumented individuals need to be reported to the IRS, but not the identity of the investor. Well, the IRS quickly realized that there were some very large holes in the QI bucket. Investment funds, for example, weren't required to participate. QI provided the IRS with withholding tax related to investments in U.S. securities, but wasn't catching U.S. taxpayers who'd been investing in non-U.S. securities. It also wasn't catching taxpayers who said, you know what, I got this money out of the U.S. tax-free. I just want to hide it someplace safe. I'm not really worried about investment returns. And then there's also the fact that the United States, which is one of the only few countries in the world and the only major one, they tax based on citizenship, not residency. So especially in Canada, where there are about 1 million Canadians who are legal residents, yet are still considered U.S. citizens, have U.S. green cards, or even, as mentioned earlier, snowbird for a certain amount of time each year. If they go over certain limits, they are also considered U.S. taxpayers. So these clients could very easily be missed under current documentation procedures. But it was the UBS scandal that really brought this whole issue to a head and demonstrated how easy it was for Americans to hide assets offshore. The IRS had determined that these holes in QI actually meant billions of dollars of revenue each year that was being lost to the Treasury. Plus, Congress and the American public were truly outraged by the UBS scandal, and that some financial institutions would actually be actively soliciting clients with promises that they would hide their money from the U.S. tax authorities. So it was out of this environment that FATCA was born as part of the 2010 HIRE Act, which was passed by Congress. And what the IRS and U.S. Treasury were really being asked to do by Congress was to create this vast worldwide net that would catch basically anybody who wasn't low risk of tax evasion who were American taxpayers. And doing so in foreign financial institutions, or even Americans who were becoming parts of non-financial entities and were gaining money through sort of hiding their ID through these corporate entities. So the U.S. government made a very interesting decision at that point. They decided to implement FATCA, that what they do is they'd have agreements with foreign financial institutions around the world and deputize them into negotiating basically information from all of their account holders, find the U.S. persons, and provide that information back to the IRS. As opposed to, what we would most commonly think they would do, which is go to other governments, say, this is the information that we need about our taxpayers who are investing in your financial institutions. So, one of the advantages of, why did they do this? If they made agreements with other financial institutions, then there was no requirement upon the U.S. to provide reciprocal information back to foreign governments about their nationals who are investing in the U.S. I think I got through that one. So under FATCA, FFIs would be required to sign agreements with the IRS, which we talked about, which would deputize them to search their accounts for U.S. taxpayers and report them directly to the IRS. If a foreign financial institution refused to sign such an agreement, they would be hit with a 30% withholding tax on all U.S. income coming into their institution. That'd mean every investor, Canadian, American, European, in a Canadian financial institution would be automatically withheld at 30% distributions, redemptions, making it virtually impossible for a financial institution to retain investors who want to invest in U.S. securities. However, as much as FFIs want to avoid this, there was one major problem that hadn't been fully accounted for. To deal with potential privacy concerns about non-U.S. financial institutions who were sending information directly to the IRS, the draft regulations for FATCA required that FFIs ask any new or existing U.S. clients to sign privacy waivers so that their personal information could be forwarded. If a client or potential client refused to do so, the FFI was either not allowed to open the client's account under FATCA regulations or close any existing accounts that they held. Obviously, a lot of FFIs went back to the IRS and Treasury and said, we can't do that. Imagine Canadian context where you have RSPs open or RESPs, and there are also, obligations that have to be respected. You just can't close those accounts and deregister all the money. And even if you could, your clients would be tremendously unhappy. So, Treasury heard, and they, in the end, did what they should have done in the first place, which was decide to deal directly with foreign governments to make this work, and came up with model intergovernmental agreements known as IGA. So you ask, what's the difference between the FATCA regulations and IGA, and how is it going to impact your business and your investors and clients? Well, the primary difference is that under an IGA, FFIs would report all U.S. taxpayer information directly to their local tax authority, in this case being the CRA. There would be obviously rules and regulations and possibly a bill passed by Canadian Parliament to implement this. So at that point, Canadian financial institutions would just be following Canadian law. This would get rid of the privacy issue, and so Canada, as well as about 50 other countries right now, have been engaged in negotiations with the United States regarding the particulars of an IGA for the last several months, and will probably produce an agreement before the end of the year. Under the agreement, Canadian institutions would report account information to CRA, who were either U.S. taxpayers or those account holders that had some U.S. identification in their accounts but had not provided you with any information to sort of remedy that. So what would we get in return? Canadian tax authorities would receive information from the IRS about Canadian residents who hold accounts in U.S. financial institutions. So Finance Canada has a very clear motivation. But there are also some major benefits for investors in the Canadian financial industry. First, there'd be no requirement to close any client's account. Second, FFIs would not have to redocument client accounts every 3 years. You can imagine how expensive that would be if you had to do it. And currently under the FATCA regulations, those are the requirements, though those could change. Third, RSPs and RIFs will almost certainly be exempted under an IGA, and probably TFSAs as well, as they're very similar to the UK savings plans, which have been exempted in the UK US agreement. And fourth, Canadian financial institutions would not have to worry about pass-through withholding provisions under an IGA, which I won't get into the detail, but if that ever came into being, it's quite assuredly the worst part of this. So what are the necessary steps that need to be done to comply with FATCA? There are 3 distinct phases, and they're very important. First, Canadian financial institutions are going to need to set up and implement new account opening procedures. To do this, there's going to be either certain forms or certain questions or documentations you need to look at to make sure that these clients aren't U.S. persons. This needs to be in place by January 1st, 2014, so we're only about a year away. And one of the key things with all these 3 phases is the relationship and the agreements and communication cooperation in the mutual funds between the funds themselves, their dealers and the advisors about who's getting the documentation, how is the information being passed on. All of that still needs to be worked out. Obviously, when we have a finalized IGA, that'll help the process going, but this is something that you need to be speaking to your partners about and start scoping out. Because if you have obligations under this, there's not a whole lot of time to put it in place. The second phase is the review of the FFI account holders to find and resolve, through additional documentation from the account holder, the tax status of the account holder who are found to have U.S. indicia. I won't go over them, but there are 7 things like U.S. address and even things like U.S. telephone numbers. So this requires that financial institutions, and under an IGA, under the model IGAs that were released by Treasury on July 26th of this year, an FFI is probably a fund manager, and it's also probably an advisor as well. This is a comprehensive program, and they being the U.S. government, want to make sure that there's no holes where clients can go to avoid being reported on. And so the definition of an FFI and therefore the responsibilities is quite broadly defined. So FFIs are going to need to do electronic searches of their databases and physical searches for high net worth accounts. And so basically anybody over $50,000 in aggregate, all the accounts you have on your systems that you can easily search, need to be electronically searched for this U.S. indicia. Once you find these people with indicia, you have to find out whether they're really U.S. persons. That's going to take a significant amount of time, and so preparation is important for that. Under an IGA, it appears that FFIs will have the choice of either contacting the client to get additional information when you find this U.S. indicia, or simply sending the information to CRA and say it's a reportable account under FATCA. That's going to be a very important decision when you're putting your procedures and business practices together, because obviously many clients who have no nexus to the United States wouldn't be thrilled if you just sent the IRS their information. But if you do not have time, or clients just don't cooperate and provide you the information you need, it's a discussion that needs to be had. So there are a whole bunch of due diligence dates that come up with timelines ranging from pre-existing accounts with over $1 million. You need to check your physical files by December 31st, 2014, to completing your physical search of, your searches of pre-existing accounts valued at $50,000 or above, but under $1 million by December 31st, 2015. The third phase is about withholding, remitting, and government reporting. The first withholding of U.S. FDAP, and FDAP stands for Fixed Determinable Annual and Periodic Income, begins on January 1st, 2014. So not a lot of time before that happens, and you have to have things in place to handle it. Pass-through payments, which I mentioned earlier, the IRS and Treasury have backed off a little because nobody in the world has figured out how in the heck anybody's going to be able to make this system workable. So they've said, we're not going to worry about it until 2017. But when you're starting to create your systems for FATCA reporting, the structure of the system, you may want to consider having the ability to deal with withholdable payments if that's an issue down the road. So where do we go from here? As I said, under either FATCA or an IGA, funds, dealers, advisors are all going to have to come to an agreement about who is responsible for doing the due diligence on pre-existing and new accounts. Similar agreements will also need to be made about who is responsible for reporting account holder information to government agencies. When Canada signs an IGA, which we will assume for the moment they will, there are also a few issues that will have to be thought through afterwards. Will the information that is sent to CRA be additional fields that you just add on to your current XML filings? Or will a whole separate filing be created just for U.S. persons and those persons who don't provide you sufficient information to demonstrate that they're not U.S. persons? What kind of registration system will be put in place by CRA and the IRS track entities that are considered FFIs within Canada for FATCA reporting purposes? Will CRA audit Canadian FFIs to ensure the FATCA protocols are being properly administrated? All of these questions are going to have to be dealt with. I'm someone who suffers from kidney stones. I know it's chronic and it's painful. FATCA is going to be the same thing. The good news is that a lot of yeah, my PR people probably wouldn't want that to be the quote. A lot of advocacy has been done by IFIC and other industry associations in Canada to educate the IRS, U.S. Treasury, and Finance Canada regarding the compliance burdens and costs that FATCA will bring to the Canadian investor and the industry. The effort has already borne fruit as the burdens of FATCA IGA compliance today has been drastically reduced compared to the original requirements proposed by the IRS and U.S. Treasury. However, there's no way of avoiding FATCA. Significant preparation work needs to be done by the entire industry, and it's very important to understand what's going to be asked of your organization under FATCA or an IGA, and to put an effective enterprise-wide plan in place and be ready for it and communicate with your partners up and down the line. And so with that, I'd just like to thank Univeris for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I will be around this afternoon if you have further questions, and with that, I'll hand it off to Richard.
Okay. John, thank you very much for that totally boring intro, by the way. I've been with Univeris for 18 years, and that's all I get. Could have told a funny story or something like that.
Just wait.
Having been with Univeris for 18 years and seeing a lot of familiar faces in the room, I just really kind of wanted to take the opportunity at the very beginning of my presentation to thank everybody for attending today, and just to let you know that it really is an honor and a pleasure to serve and to help and to partner with the quality of people and organizations in this room. It's kind of what makes our business great, and what makes us all want to come to work every day is working with people like you in this room. So I just wanted to make sure that that was said. So, thanks. So you might be thinking, well, what's Richard going to talk about after that, right? After the complexity of what FATCA is. And what I really want to kind of take the next 15 or 20 minutes to do is talk to you about a few things, actually. Firstly, our businesses are being really overwhelmed with requirements for new expertise. And James just provided a really great example of that, because FATCA is now something that's kind of being, dumped in our laps. Secondly, I want to talk about the fact that our businesses are not really alone in this. The average consumer is overwhelmed as well, but they've actually found a way to deal with it, and I'm going to show you how. And three, there's been a fundamental shift in emerging technologies that has changed the way that technology can actually help our businesses to deal with this expertise issue, this requirement for expertise. But there's a catch to that, and I'll show you that catch later on. So around 15 years ago, what was the dealer's main concern? Executing trades, settling trades, paying advisors. Compliance was a concept, not a regime. Advisors were salespersons with a focus on advice and service just starting to form. The advisor's expectations of the dealer was to process their business and make sure they got paid. Simplistic? Sure, but not by that much. Since that time, more and more knowledge areas have been introduced to the dealer and to the advisor world. Regulation, legislation, competition, the evolution of the advisor, the evolution of the investor, finding new revenue streams, demographics, industry consolidation, and technology have all contributed to the infinitely more complex world that dealers now find themselves in. And what you are seeing here is actually simply a subset of all the knowledge areas dealers must contend with. We can create 10 versions of this slide with different knowledge areas in each. That's what we're dealing with. Let's look at an example. Regulation came to the fore in the late 90s, spawning new rules and policies. Further regulatory initiatives resulted in the client relationship model, creating new legislation and new knowledge areas for dealers to understand. And James just presented on a new knowledge area that's being foisted upon us as we speak. And you know what? It's not ending. The industry and our businesses are continually evolving, and new knowledge areas will continue to be introduced that will require some level of expertise. In other words, the complexity of our business is because of the knowledge and expertise required to operate in today's market. Think of the challenges this presents. Firstly, are we reaching the limits of expertise or our ability to learn new things as an organization? And how does this impact our ability to run our businesses efficiently and effectively? Secondly, how do we ensure that this knowledge is maintained within our organizations? People get reassigned, people leave, and the worst part of that is the knowledge and expertise that leaves with them. And it doesn't necessarily mean the knowledge of a topic. It could be as simple as the knowledge of a process. In other words, losing knowledge of what or why is bad enough, but losing knowledge of how can be equally debilitating and probably more frustrating. So we've established how complex our business has become because of the knowledge that's required to operate it. So what can we do about it? Traditionally, if some element of change and the knowledge associated with that change is required in our business, then we need to somehow acquire or reacquire that knowledge. We may outsource that knowledge requirement. We may train our staff on that knowledge. We may hire new people that have that knowledge. Some way, somehow, we'll need to adjust our business to be able to accommodate the complexity that was just added to our business plans. In the last few years, the knowledge requirement has actually shifted in a pretty significant way. What has happened is that the need for knowledge now triggers an immediate search by consumers for a technology solution. Let's use the simple example of the knowledge required to get from point A to point B, where point B is an unfamiliar destination. In the past, how would someone acquire that knowledge? By buying and reading a map. But this requires skill in map reading. Granted, not a lot of skill, but some skill. Which way is east? How far is it to that next cutoff? How long will the trip take you? You mean I have to read the road signs to get me there? That last point is actually particularly challenging to my wife, even though I love her very much. Now, technology will do it for all of us. So it says, go 12.7 kilometers and turn left. Trip time is 47 minutes. Oh, and traffic is bad on one stretch, so it'll take you 55 minutes. What is happening is that we are trending towards a reflex to use technology to fill that knowledge gap. The phrase, is there an app for that, has become a watch phrase for all the things that apps can now do. And let's take it one step further. It's not about getting from point A to point B, but also about being able to deviate from the stated path and still end up at the same place. We can take a wrong turn, whether accidental or intentional, and the app will still get us where we want to go. The focus is on achieving the end result because technology allows us to track and take care of more things than what we can otherwise do. So there's less reliance on the how. So we've determined that our business is continually becoming more complex, requiring more and more knowledge. And we've shown that the consumer reflex is moving towards looking at technology to fill that knowledge gap. So now let's take a very quick look at technology systems and how technology has evolved to create this reflex. Technology applications have changed considerably over the decades, from data management to applying business logic to automation. In our business lifetimes, application has further evolved to focus on productivity, then web-based applications, to the point where we are now seeing the next generation of applications, that being expert apps. What is an expert app? It is an application designed to address a specific need or set of use cases that enable a not necessarily expert person to perform that task. Think of a GPS or a movie maker or Expedia.ca. In EWMS, think in terms of Express Suite or Portfolio Insights. The value of expert apps is in allowing us to maintain expertise amid increasing complexity and change. What is driving this trend towards expert apps? It is a concept of consumer computing, which is the notion that consumer technology is leading the market by combining user-friendliness, mobility, cloud, and immediate reward, often outpacing the professional tools of the business enterprise. For example, we can trade securities on our iPhone, but the advisor trades using green screens. Consumer computing is really the result of consumerization, which, if you'll recall, as being the most prominent knowledge area from the first slide I showed you, right in the middle. Consumerization is the growing tendency for new information technology to emerge first in the consumer market and then spread into business and government organizations. The emergence of consumer markets as the primary driver of IT innovation is seen as a major IT industry shift. So what does this mean? First, consumer technology is different. Expert apps offer immediate reward, no training, and with acceptance of self-serve elements to guide users and enhance acceptance. Secondly, we are entering a new computing area where users are consumers, with reflexes towards technology helping fill that knowledge gap, and enterprises are now incented to provide expert applications to users to address new knowledge areas. Thirdly, the knowledge required to run a dealership will be very difficult, if not impractical, without the support of these expert systems. Expert applications will help address issues surrounding new knowledge requirements and maintaining knowledge within our business. It is important to understand that while industry complexity is changing linearly, technology change is exponential. So the ability to leverage technology into productive outcomes through expert apps will provide a much greater advantage to our businesses versus others who do not. Okay, so we've demonstrated how complex our business is. We've highlighted the reflex towards technology to solve that complexity. And we've shown how the evolution of consumer computing and expert apps have really created this reflex because of the innovation happening in the consumer technology market. Having said all that, it is not enough to just say, oh, we need to incorporate consumer computing into our technology strategy to deliver expert apps. It's not that simple. The consumer system is not just what you see on the screen. It is not just a device. It is a platform where expert apps are being distilled into a single delivery system. The ease, intelligence, and interconnectivity of the consumer experience is because of the platform underneath. So really, the consumer system is a notion that the platform, as in OS X and iCloud, plus its app store, is what creates a useful device. Let's use another simple example. 5 years ago, if you were traveling, what technology did you travel with? Likely a laptop, a cell phone, a camera, a GPS, maybe some adapters, and so on. Today, you're likely bringing only a smartphone or a tablet. Why? Because the platform enables all these apps on a single device, basically a unified experience. So I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here. Assumption number one, most of you take more pictures now because of the camera on your phone than ever before. Is that true? Assumption number two, most of you had shared these pictures more than ever before through email, text, and so on. Is that true? This is what you end up looking like when you work at a software vendor for 18 years. I was speaking on the phone with someone on Halloween, and I happen to be dressed this way, of course, and was able to share this picture with that person in about 5 seconds. This has nothing to do with the characteristics of the camera app itself on my phone. It's the feeling of personal interaction and instant gratification is because of the power of the platform, not to mention the power of a wig and some makeup. To give you a better idea of the power of the consumer system platform, have a look at this quick video.
Instead of having to sift through and organize all the information you need throughout your day, all that information is ready at the exact moment you actually need it. Introducing Google Now. Now with Android, one simple swipe gives you the information that is relevant to you, right now. As you leave your house, Google Now is smart enough to check current traffic conditions and has prepared an alternate route for your commute. Google Now is always one step ahead, so you can feel more confident as you navigate your day. When you're at a subway station, Google Now can tell you what trains are next, find you interesting local places to eat. Is there a good Japanese noodle bar nearby? And when you're in a restaurant, your phone already has the best dishes listed for you. Google Now automatically keeps you updated on your favorite sports teams in real time, just in case you were curious about that no-hitter. With the predictive power of Now, you get just what you need to know right when you need it.
For our businesses to be able to meet the ever-expanding knowledge requirements and to be able to deliver expert apps to our users, what delivers this is a platform that can provide that unified user experience. And that's the catch that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. Oh, sorry. The investment in the consumer system by Apple and Google, like you just saw, is easily misinterpreted to be in the device. The hype and demand associated with new products is unprecedented, but in fact, Apple and Google have been investing for the last 10 years or more than 10 years in the platform and continue to invest in the platform because that is the key to enabling expert apps to be delivered. At Univeris, our investment is also in the platform. We see this as a strategic priority to allow us to deliver the consumer or user experience that is being demanded given the increasing knowledge requirements of our businesses. We are providing your business an enterprise system, meaning not only the platform, but also the suite of expert applications available within that ecosystem. Just as a unified experience is what contributes to the consumer system, i.e. contacts, texting, Twitter, phone, email, GPS, etc., all working together, so the unified experience of EWMS contributes to the delivery of expert apps to your business. It's what makes Portfolio Insights so valuable, combining analytics with the investor experience, data for trusted results. It's what makes Express Suite so valuable, onboarding with business rules around information capture and forms for precise and repeatable execution. It's what makes WebConnect so valuable, a framework for conversational collaboration between advisors and investors that will be demanded by the consumer. And finally, it's what makes Supervision Insights so valuable, providing a dashboard of activities that allows you to anticipate problems before they occur. Now, are we going to be able to deliver every expert app that is needed? No. But consider this. Apple and Google have created their platforms to allow the development of other applications to be delivered as a unified experience. Think of simple things like a GPS app that uses the device to determine where you are, or how Twitter can be used to deliver pictures, links to articles, etc. The EWS platform is also enabled to deliver third-party expert apps in a unified way. Equisoft and Synergize are prime examples, the intent of which is to incorporate these 4 enterprise system characteristics you see on the screen to deliver a better consumer experience. One final thought. Do we still need experts? Absolutely. Expert applications are not a replacement for human knowledge and expertise. Rather, they allow us to spend time on the things we really want to achieve, as opposed to spending time on attempting. More time achieving, less time attempting. A unified platform levels the playing field for expertise to thrive. So to sum up, our businesses are under immense pressure to add and maintain knowledge. The consumer reflex is to use technology to fill that knowledge. And what consumer computing has taught us is that to deliver expert apps to help address the knowledge requirements requires a platform that enables unification of these apps. And Univeris provides that platform to deliver unified expert apps to meet the growing knowledge demands of our business. In other words, there is an app for that. Thank you for listening.